Shalom, shalom. All praises to the Most High. For those that typically watch my YouTube videos, today's going to be a little bit different. We want to go into the history, just kind of go around the history, not too deep, um, about the real King George Washington, which is a so-called black man. Okay, we're going to talk about the real black George Washington, okay? Before the pillage, before the robbery, the identity theft, okay, of his name, of who he is, okay? We're going to go into that, and I'm going to read a few notes that I have accumulated, and we're just going to go into the story and how they sound similar, okay? Now, this is open for for your judgment, so you can take it for what you want. You can do further research. I encourage that also. So we're going to go into it. This is a article, and it reads at the top. It starts off by saying George Washington. On this date, we mark the birth of George Washington. Now, this is referring to the black George Washington, okay? In 1817, he was a black former businessman and the founder of the town of Centralia, Washington. Born a slave in Virginia, George Washington escaped and was raised by a white family in Missouri. Unable to attend school, he was tutored and eventually ran a sawmill in St. Joseph, Missouri. He struggled under the racial restrictions of the slave-holding state and in 1850 joined a wagon train on the Oregon Trail. After reaching the Northwest, George Washington again entered the lumber business and established a homestead on the Chehalis River, but his farm lay in the path of the Northern Pacific Railroad. He and the company came to terms, and with the settlement he received, Washington planned a new town in 1872. He called it Centerville, and he laid out 2,000 lots, setting aside sites for parks and churches. The town thrived, though the name was changed to Centralia. George Washington spent the rest of his life there as an honored citizen. When he died in the 1905, the town 30 miles south of Olympia shut down for a day of mourning. George Washington Park, named after him, is in the heart of Centralia at Pearl Street and Harrison Street. Okay, so we're going to focus on Missouri. Okay, we're going to focus on Missouri, and raised by a white family in Missouri. Okay, now this George Washington, supposedly, according to information that was put out, was born prior to George Washington Carver. Okay, but there are striking similarities in the stories. This is George Washington Carver, okay? Born on a farm near Diamond, Missouri. Notice, born on a farm again, like the other George Washington that was black, okay? The exact date of Carver's birth is unknown, but it's thought he was born in January or June of 1864. 9 years prior, Moses Carver, a white farm owner, purchased George Carver's mother, Mary, when she was 13 years old. This is the other George Washington that I was talking about at first that was supposedly born in 1817. All right. Now this right here is the Caucasian George Washington. Okay. It says George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732, at his family's plantation on Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County in the British colony of Virginia, to Augustine Washington and his second wife, Mary Ball Washington. Two black men named George Washington, okay, which would be more like Yahweh Washai or Yahweh Washi. So there are similarities, okay? And the name George could go all the way back to 1354, okay? All right, now this is just like a street right here that I pulled up or whatever. It pulled up through Google, okay, because I put in 1354 and this is what popped up. And it kind of got my attention just with the name that goes behind it. So it says 1354 Majestic Drive, Washington, okay, and that's in another state, all right, not Missouri, okay. And then here's another 1354 Washington Boulevard, all right. So the name Washington and the name George, okay, let's go into what that means. George means ever ruler, always mighty, God is my judge. George is a masculine noun, okay? It's a masculine noun, all right? And also George, King George or George means a worker of the earth, okay? A farmer, okay? So there's a lot of information that's put out, and when I say information, I want to make a clarification on not only the pillage and the rape and the identity theft of our people, but years back, you know, a lot of years back, our people's identities were getting stolen. Okay, they were getting stolen either through marrying into families for a gain of inheritance, and then taking the name of the family or the father of that family to claim rights and deeds. See, everything that was done here in the Americas was done on behalf of the enemy. Those things that were done were unjust, okay? Our people were robbed of their identities, okay? Our people were robbed of their land, all right? So not only did the enemy want your land, but they wanted your identity as well. You see, even your name, like George Washington, okay? The thieves of King George, okay, they tried to bury his legacy. They tried to bury his lineage. The lineage of the Black George Washington is the descendants that have the right, okay, and ownership of the land in America and elsewhere. Okay, because George Washington was a king. All right. The name George Floyd, which a lot of you are familiar with, that name, not talking about the man, but that just that name, George, okay, going into the 9 minutes or however many minutes, just the number 9, okay, how the cop stood on his neck. Okay, now they're only really, technically, they're only 9 numbers. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then things go back to 0 or 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, so on and so on. Okay, now you're hearing talks of a reset. Okay, that represents something. It's symbolic. Okay, they're trying to bury the lineage. All right. The murder that was committed here in America by the so-called European on the real George Washington, which is a black man, so-called black man, okay? Basically, the devil tried to demasculate him, okay, in front of the world. All right? The same way they're trying to do the lineage and the inheritance of black George Washington, okay, who is the owner of all the land. And they're trying to destroy, okay, what he really represents, which is our freedom and rulership over this world. All right. There's an enemy out there that is so jealous and hateful that he will try to do anything to justify himself by lying, stealing, cheating, okay? Trying to cheat out the rightful owners, man, all right, of the land and our ancestors, okay? Names that were stolen along with the land, as I mentioned earlier, all right? So, the land has, resources, different spoils that must be returned, okay, to the king and the prince. Okay, they have a right to this land, and I'm talking about King David, okay, the lineage of King David. See, the name George just means royalty, just like the name David. That means royalty. Okay? Basically, this country is trying to reset their lies. They're covering over you. They're even coming with a fictional currency. Okay? They're doing anything to try to reset their lies. Even giving you a George Floyd statue, which is nothing but satire, okay? It's being sarcastic because they know who the real George is. All right? The real George Washington, the black George Washington, a royal lineage. But you just got to do your research. See? You got to find out and see what's really going on, man. But hopefully that right there is enough to spark your interest. I know it's not the typical thing that I do on this YouTube channel, but it's just something that I wanted to share with you. Hopefully that'll spark the mind to spark an idea so we can create that change. All right. Shalom.